Hello students, good morning to all. We will discuss about the volvulus. So students, volvulus is a word which is derived from the Latin word volvere, which means to twist upon. So the students, the parts of the GI tract where the volvulus occurs, these are the small intestine, stomach, cecum, transverse colon, splenic flexure of colon and sigmoid colon. So any part of the gastrointestinal tract where volvulus can occur, where there is a abnormal mobility. Then students, colonic volvuli. So in colonic volvuli, sigmoid volvulus is seen in 90% of the patients, cecal volvulus in 20% of the patients, transverse colon volvulus and the volvulus of the splenic flexure of the colon. So these are the rare volvulus and they seen in only 2 to 3% of the patients. So sigmoid volvulus is the commonest volvulus of the colon. Then the types of the volvulus. Volvulus is divided into primary and the secondary. Primary volvulus occurs due to congenital malrotation of the gut, abnormal mesenteric attachments or congenital bands, and the examples of primary volvulus are the volvulus neonatorum, cecal volvulus, and the sigmoid volvulus. Secondary volvulus, it occurs secondary to the acquired adhesions around the stoma. Then students, now we will discuss sigmoid volvulus because it is the commonest volvulus of the colon. So the sigmoid volvulus, first is the definition. Sigmoid volvulus is defined as a twisting or axial rotation of a portion of a bowel about its mesentery. So the sigmoid volvulus is the most common site of volvulus and it is first described by von Rakitansky. Etiology of the sigmoid volvulus. Sigmoid volvulus is seen in elderly patients with chronic constipation, consumption of the high fiber diet. So the high fiber diet consumption, it leads to sigmoid volvulus because of the lengthening of the colon, and these are more commonly seen in the Asia and the Africa where there is a high fiber diet consumption by the people. Then the incidence is increased in institutionalized patients having neuropsychiatric disorders receiving psychotropic drugs, because these psychotropic drugs, they affect the motility of the colon and that is one of the factor which predisposes to the volvulus. Also genetic predisposition is identified in certain families and the tribes. Then the age of the patient. The mean age of the patient or the age of the patient is 40 to 60 years in developing countries, and in developed countries it is 70 to 80, but it is seen earlier in developing countries. So age is 40 to 60 years. Then the incidence is higher in males as compared to the females because of the dolicho-mesocolic anatomy. So what is this dolicho-mesocolic anatomy? Here the sigmoid mesocolon is longer and wider in males. Means what? The sigmoid mesocolon is longer than wide. The length of the sigmoid mesocolon is more than the breadth of the mesocolon, and that is seen in males, and that's why the males are more prone for volvulus. Sigmoid volvulus is rare in children. Again, sigmoid volvulus is more common in patients with the conditions which are associated with redundant sigmoid colon, such as the Chagas disease. It is a parasitic disease, all you know, it is caused by Trypanosoma cruzi. Then Parkinson's disease, chronic neurological disorders, diabetes, laxative abuse, high altitude, and the previous surgery involving the mobilization of the sigmoid colon. So all these factors which are associated with redundant sigmoid colon, which predisposes to the volvulus. Then the students, predisposing factors for the sigmoid volvulus. So the predisposing factors are the band of adhesions then overloaded pelvic colon, long mesocolon, and the narrow attachment of the pelvic mesocolon. So out of all these factors, the predisposing factor is the presence of long mesentery and the narrow base. Now see students, band of the adhesions. So where this band of the adhesions occurs, it is peridiverticulatis. Now see students, there are two types of the diverticuli. One is the true diverticuli and other is the pseudo diverticulum. So in true diverticulum, it includes all the layers of the bowel, mucosa, submucosa, muscularis and the serosa. But in pseudo diverticulum, only there is a outpouching of the mucosa through the muscular layer. So it contains only mucosa, submucosa and the serosa. So there is no muscular layer in the pseudo diverticulum. So what happens? As there is no muscle in the pseudo diverticulum, there is no emptying of the diverticuli, and as there is no emptying, there are high chances of infection in pseudo diverticuli, and because of this there is a peridiverticulitis, and because of the diverticulitis there are chances of formation of adhesions. So this leads to the formation of adhesions, and to these adhesions there is a rotation of the volvulus, rotation of the sigmoid colon. Then the clinical presentation of the patients. So the students, patient presents with the signs and symptoms of large bowel obstruction. So the signs and symptoms of the large bowel obstruction are abdominal pain, which is sudden in onset, colicky, and it is in lower abdomen. Then abdominal distension, it is asymmetric abdominal distension, more on the left side. Then the vomiting. So vomiting is a late feature in the sigmoid volvulus, because all you know, as we go away from the pylorus, the vomiting is a late feature. Then constipation or obstipation. So what is obstipation? Obstipation means patient cannot pass stool or gas, so that is called as a obstipation. So these are the symptoms: abdominal pain, abdominal distension, vomiting and constipation or obstipation. Then the signs. When we examine the patient and do the per abdominal examination, so on per abdominal examination what we get is the on palpation. So on palpation, either there is a tenderness or no tenderness. There is a distension but there is a no tenderness. So whenever there is no tenderness or no rebound tenderness, so it indicates that the bowel is viable. But if there is a tenderness or rebound tenderness on palpation, so it indicates that there are high chances of gangrene of the bowel, or the bowel is not viable. Then if there is a guarding and rigidity on palpation, so it indicates is a possibility of perforation of the colon. And on percussion, we can get the tympanic note all over the abdomen. So these are the clinical features of the patient. Now there are two types of the presentations. One is the fulminant and other is the indolent. Fulminant means we can call it as a acute presentation, and the indolent we can call it as a subacute presentation. So in fulminant presentation, there is a sudden onset of abdominal pain and severe pain, early vomiting, and there is a rapid deteriorating clinical condition of the patient. So the patient rapidly deteriorates. But in subacute presentation, it is insidious in onset, there is a less pain, late vomiting, and the course is progressive. So this is the difference between the acute presentation and the subacute, or we call it as a fulminant and the indolent. Then students, on clinical examination, is it possible to get the idea about the gangrenous bowel or non-gangrenous bowel? So when we suspect the bowel ischemia clinically, so on palpation there is a rebound tenderness, patient has a severe abdominal pain, tachycardia and fever. So these all goes in favor of gangrene of the bowel. So clinical examination is very important in these patients, because on clinical examination only we can get the idea whether there is a gangrene of the bowel or there is no gangrene of the bowel. Then the diagnosis of the sigmoid volvulus. So the diagnosis is, first we can examine the patient. We should take the history of the patient, and on examination, so there is a distension of abdomen. On palpation, there may be tenderness, there may be guarding or rigidity, or there may not be guarding or rigidity. There is a tympanic note all over the abdomen on percussion, and the digital rectal examination is empty. So after our clinical diagnosis, we want to confirm our clinical diagnosis, so we subject the patient for investigations, and these are the radiological investigations. So there are three types of the investigations: plain abdominal radiograph, then barium or gastrography in enema, and the CT scan of abdomen. So now students, these are the radiological investigations, but in all patients, or whenever the patient presents with signs and symptoms of sigmoid volvulus, we are not doing all these investigations in every patient. So it depends upon clinical condition of the patient and which investigation is done in which patient. So we decide upon the clinical examination and the clinical condition of the patient. So students, first is the plain abdominal radiograph. So on plain abdominal radiograph, which is taken in erect posture, or if patient is not in a condition to stand, then it can be taken in the supine position. So these are the signs which are seen on plain abdominal radiograph. First is the coffee bean sign, or it is also called as the bent inner tube sign. In some books it has also mentioned that it is also called as the omega loop sign. Then on barium enema or gastrography in enema, there is a sign which is called as a bird's beak sign, and the CT scan abdomen, there is a Whorl sign. So now students, we are not doing all these investigations in a single patient. If we first we will do the plain abdominal radiograph of the patient, and if we have some doubt about the volvulus, then we subject the patient for CT scan of the abdomen. Nowadays barium enema is not done because CT scan is readily available, and that's why it is not done, but it is mentioned in the books. Now the students see, this is the plain abdominal radiograph. And so what are the signs on plain abdominal radiograph is the coffee bean sign or bent inner tube sign. Now see these students, this is the coffee bean and this is the plain abdominal radiograph. So it looks like a coffee bean, and that's why it is called as the coffee bean sign. This sign has a sensitivity of 75% and specificity of 100%. Plain abdominal radiograph is diagnostic in 57 to 90% of the patients. So in all patients, plain abdominal radiograph is not diagnostic. So in 57 to 90% of the patients only it is a diagnostic. So on plain abdominal radiograph, there is a massive dilatation of the colon, and it is going towards the left dome of the diaphragm. And now see, there are loss of hostrations. So the hostrations of the colon, they are lost. Then students, gastrography in enema. When we do the enema or gastrography in or barium enema, then this is the sign which is called as a bird's beak sign. So see here, there is a arrow and this is a bird's beak sign. So what it indicates, bird's beak sign, it indicates the site of twisting of the colon. Nowadays gastrography in enema or barium enema becoming absolute because of the availability of the CT scan. So we are nowadays barium enema is not done. So only plain abdominal radiograph and if we are in doubt, then CT scan of the abdomen of the patient is done. So we have done the clinical examination of the patient, and on clinical examination we have suspected it is a case of sigmoid volvulus, and after that, for confirmation of our diagnosis, we have done the radiological investigations. So another, suppose if there are no clear cut idea on plain abdominal radiograph, then we will subject the patient to CT scan of the abdomen. So CT scan of the abdomen, it shows Whorl sign. So here is the Whorl sign. You see here, it looks like this. So this sign is because of the twisting of the mesentery. The sensitivity of this sign for the diagnosis of sigmoid volvulus is 57 to 100%. So again, there is a range for the sensitivity and specificity of this sign. Then students, in different books also, these other signs, they are described, but for your level only, plain abdominal radiograph, you have to tell only bent inner tube sign or coffee bean sign and the omega loop sign. So this is another sign which is called as a Freeman-Dahl sign. So in this sign, see this, there are the three lines and which represents the sigmoid walls, and they are seen converging towards the site of the obstruction in the sigmoid volvulus, and there is a empty rectal shadow. So now this, so this is a one line, this is the second line, and this is the third line. So the three lines, they are converging towards the site of the obstruction, and see students, there is no gas in the rectum. Then another sign which is seen on plain abdominal radiograph, it is called as a northern exposure sign or northern star sign. So what happens in this, the dilated sigmoid colon, it extends above the transverse colon, or above means towards the cranial side. So these are the two signs. It has mentioned in literature, but it is not mentioned in our standard textbooks. So students, you should write only two signs. One is the coffee bean sign and the bent inner tube sign. Now once we have diagnosed the patient, it is a case of sigmoid volvulus. Now we want to resuscitate the patient. Resuscitation is important because we want to optimize the patient for the surgery. Now what is done in resuscitation? So we do the, now we have done the radiological investigation. So now we will do the laboratory investigations, and the laboratory investigations, complete blood count. So it gives the idea about the hemoglobin percentage, then platelet count and others. Then bleeding time and clotting time, because we want to rule out the bleeding disorder, because if patient is suffering from any bleeding disorder and such patient is subjected for surgery, there may be heavy bleeding. That's why we want to rule out bleeding, any bleeding disorder in such patients, and therefore we are doing bleeding time and clotting time. Then the correction of dehydration and the acid base balance, if it is present, we will insert the Ryle's tube for aspiration, Foley's catheter for measurement of the urine output. We will start IV fluids and the antibiotics. Blood grouping and cross matching is done, because if patient is anemic, patient may require blood transfusion before surgery. Then the simultaneous treatment of comorbidities like diabetes and hypertension, if any, is required. After that, written consent of the patient or relatives prior to surgery is important. Then the other two investigations, chest X-ray, PA view and the ECG. Chest X-ray, PA view to rule out any pre-existing lung pathology, and the ECG to rule out any cardiac problem before surgery. So these chest X-ray and ECG, they are important from anesthetic point of view. Then non-operative management of the patient. So now students, on clinical examination of the patient, we get the idea whether this patient is having gangrene or patient is not having any gangrene. So on clinical examination we get the idea. So depending upon that we will advise him operative or non-operative treatment. So the non-operative treatment is the endoscopic. So this is the endoscopic detorsion and the flatus tube decompression. So if there are no signs of the gangrene, we will subject the patient for colonoscopy, and we will do the colonoscopic detorsion and put the flatus tube. So this is the view of colonoscopy. Patient is placed in the Sims position or left lateral position. Rigid sigmoidoscope or flexible colonoscope is used, but nowadays flexible colonoscopes are used. And if the detorsion is successful, then the tip of the flatus tube is lubricated with xylocaine jelly and inserted through the rigid sigmoidoscope across the twisted segment and secured to the skin to maintain the colonic decompression. Plain abdominal radiograph is obtained following endoscopic detorsion to confirm resolution of the volvulus. So this is the flatus tube, and this flatus tube is inserted through the rigid sigmoidoscope. So the colonoscopic detorsion is successful in 60 to 80% of the cases. So on colonoscopy we get this picture. So this is the characteristic finding. This is called as the pinwheel configuration of the mucosa. Because of the volvulus we get this type of picture. So this is the pinwheel, and this is the pinwheel configuration of the mucosa which is seen on endoscopy. Now the non-operative management. So non-operative management, student, it includes or it depends upon whether the endoscopic reduction is successful or endoscopic reduction is unsuccessful. So what we have done, first, patient don't have any signs of gangrene, so we have subjected the patient for colonoscopy. So what will happen? The colonoscopic reduction may be successful or it may not be successful. Suppose the endoscopic reduction is successful, then what we will do? We will prepare the patient for definitive surgery. So we will keep the rectal tube for 2 to 3 days, and then we will optimize the patient for the surgery. If the patient is fit for open surgery or laparotomy, then we will do the definitive surgical treatment. That means sigmoidectomy with primary anastomosis. If the patient is not fit for the surgery, then what we will do? There are two procedures: percutaneous endoscopic colostomy, endoscopic tip fastener fixation. So these are the high risk patients. High risk patient means what? Elderly patients which are chronically ill, malnourished, having cardiopulmonary problems. So these are the patients which are the poor surgical candidates. So in these patients, so we will do this percutaneous endoscopic colostomy or endoscopic tip fastener fixation. If the endoscopic reduction is unsuccessful, then we will straightway post the patient for surgery. That is the exploratory laparotomy, and then the procedure depends upon the intraoperative findings. So students, in non-operative management, what we are doing? We are doing the colonoscopy, and if there is a reduction of the volvulus, then depending upon the condition of the patient, we will do the procedures. If there is no success of the endoscopic reduction, then straightway we will subject the patient for surgery. So then operative management. So students, see, the operative management is indicated when the endoscopic detorsion is unsuccessful or the clinical examination shows the presence of bowel ischemia, gangrene or perforation. So the clinical examination is very important because it dictates the line of treatment. Either there is a gangrene, there is a no gangrene. If there is a no gangrene, then the treatment is different. If there is a gangrene, straightway subject the patient for emergency exploratory laparotomy. Now students, we have done the emergency exploratory laparotomy, the abdomen is open. Now on opening the abdomen, sometimes what happens, if the patient is having no gangrene and we have done the colonoscopy, but colonoscopy has failed, so colonoscopy is unsuccessful and the patient doesn't have any gangrene. So on opening the abdomen, the treatment depends upon this, whether there is a gangrene of the colon or there is no gangrene of the colon. So first is sigmoid colon is not gangrenous, that means sigmoid colon is viable. So in that case there are two types of the procedures, resectional procedures and the non-resectional procedures. Resectional procedures means we are doing sigmoidectomy and primary end-to-end colorectal anastomosis. And the second is the non-resectional procedures. Non-resectional procedures, they are done in patients who do not tolerate major surgery or they do not tolerate the resection. So these are the poor surgical candidates, and in that patients we will do sigmoidopexy or mesosigmoidoplasty and the extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. Now students, the second option, sigmoid colon is gangrenous. Once there is a gangrene of the sigmoid colon, it becomes inevitable to remove the colon. So after removing the colon, we have three options. One is the Hartmann's procedure or Hartmann's operation, then the exteriorization of the bowel, or we call it as a double barrel colostomy, Paul Mikulicz type, and third one, sigmoidectomy with primary end-to-end colorectal anastomosis. But students, the patient is usually not prepared in emergency cases and the primary anastomosis is avoided because there are high chances of post-operative anastomotic leak. Now, if the resection is considered, the decision to perform a primary anastomosis is based on the common surgical principles. So now students, here if the patient is having a gangrene of the colon, so we have removed the colon and we have adopted one of these procedures. So third procedure, primary end-to-end colorectal anastomosis. Is it possible to do the primary colorectal anastomosis? It can be done with or without on-table colonic lavage. So on-table colonic lavage, we can prepare the bowel on table. But this depends upon the clinical condition of the patient, whether patient is hemodynamically stable, nutritional status of the patient, adequate blood supply of the colon, and the tension on the anastomotic suture line, and the degree of contamination of the peritoneal cavity. So if any of these factor is present, we will not going to do the primary anastomosis. So we will advise Hartmann's procedure. Now see students, after opening the abdomen, so the twist in the colon, in the sigmoid colon, is nearly always anti-clockwise twist. So as the twist is in the anti-clockwise direction, for detorsion the bowel is rotated in a clockwise direction. So there may be 180 degree rotation or more than 380 degree rotation. So 180 degree rotation, it will lead to obstruction. More than 360 degree rotation, because of the occlusion of the mesenteric vessels, it leads to strangulation and the gangrene of the bowel. So the colonic ischemia and necrosis, it occurs as a result of significant luminal distension and venous or arterial occlusion in the sigmoid mesentery. So students, what happens, see this is, here it leads to the closed loop obstruction, and again there is a fermentation of the bacteria, and because of the occlusion of the venous and the arterial supply, it leads to the gangrene. So the twist, so remember the twist is in the anti-clockwise direction. So during surgery we have to rotate the colon in a clockwise direction to derotate it. So this is an important point. Now students, what is the difference between viable and the non-viable bowel? Once we have opened the abdomen, So how the normal bowel and the gangrenous bowel looks. So here first is the circulation. Dark color becomes lighter in viable. Non-viable bowel, the dark color remains as it is. Then there are visible pulsations in the mesenteric arteries in case of viable bowel, and there are no detectable pulsations in the non-viable bowel. Then the general appearance of the bowel. Viable bowel is shiny in appearance, while the non-viable bowel it is dull and lusterless. Then the intestinal musculature. It is firm in viable bowel, while it is in gangrenous bowel it is flabby, thin and friable. In viable bowel, peristalsis may be observed, but in non-viable bowel or gangrenous bowel, there are no peristalsis. So on table, by examination of the bowel, we can decide whether it is a gangrenous or non-gangrenous. So see students, so this is a case of sigmoid volvulus and it is a gangrenous. So see the pictures. So it is a dark in color, dull and lusterless. So it is a dark in color and lusterless. Now students see, while operating in a case of gangrenous sigmoid volvulus, when we are doing sigmoidectomy, so before doing the sigmoidectomy, so see, in presence of gangrene, a care must be taken to control the fascicular pedicle prior to the reduction. Prior to the reduction means untwisting the colon, and so for untwisting the colon we have to rotate in a clockwise direction because the twist is in the anti-clockwise direction. So in order to avoid severe hemodynamic instability, that means before untwisting the colon we have to control the vascular pedicles. Why to control the vascular pedicles? Because if we do the detorsion, so what will happen? Because of the gangrenous bowel, there are high chances of entering the bacterial endotoxins into the circulation, and it will lead to the reperfusion syndrome, and patient will lead to hemodynamic instability. So to avoid that, we have to control the vascular pedicles prior to the reduction. But sometimes because of the enormous dilatation, this may not be possible. Now students, there are two types of the procedures. One is the non-resectional procedures and others are the resectional procedures. So non-resectional procedures are the sigmoidopexy, mesosigmoidoplasty and the extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. So sigmoidopexy. So this is a diagram. Again, Gore-Tex bands, they are sutured to the abdominal wall and delivered through the sigmoid mesocolon. So these are the bands. They are delivered through the sigmoid mesocolon and then they are fixed to the abdominal wall. Sigmoidopexy means fixation of the colon so that it will not lead to the torsion. Then another new method is a percutaneous endoscopic sigmoidopexy using the T fasteners. T fasteners, that means in PEG, percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy, the same set is used for this percutaneous endoscopic sigmoid colon fixation. So this is indicated in very high risk patients. It is a simple, safe and efficient treatment for inoperable sigmoid volvulus. Length percutaneous puncture of the sigmoid colon and fixation of the colon is done under local anesthesia. Then second is the detorsion and the mesosigmoidoplasty. Now students, see what is done. So we have seen the most important factor which leads to the sigmoid volvulus is the length of the sigmoid mesocolon is more and the base is narrow. Now here the incision is taken along the length of the sigmoid mesocolon and it is sutured transversely. So the incision is taken longitudinally and it is sutured transversely. So by doing so, there is a broadening of the base of the attachment of the mesentery. So this is the detorsion and the mesosigmoidoplasty. But there are high chances of recurrence after this procedure. So this is the figure. So what it shows, a perpendicular incision is made through all the layers of the mesosigmoid of the sigmoid colon. So students, it is not necessary for you to go through the operative details of this procedure, how to, but see, there is a longitudinal incision which is made through all the layers of the mesosigmoid. There is a preservation of the first branch of the sigmoid artery and the uppermost vascular radicals. And so you remember only the longitudinal incision is taken and it is sutured transversely. So horizontal suturing is done, so that there is a broadening of the base of the mesocolon. Now the detorsion and other is the extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. All we know, the sigmoid colon is intraperitoneal. So if we do extraperitonealization, so it will avoid the torsion of the sigmoid colon. So how it is done? So it is done under general or spinal anesthesia. Patient has given general or spinal anesthesia, and the midline or right paramedian incision is taken. And after opening the abdomen, colon is deflated with the flatus tube or the needling, and it is untwisted. So how it is untwisted? It is rotated in a clockwise direction. An extraperitoneal space is created between the peritoneum and the abdominal wall. Then an untwisted colon brought out in this space after making a small hole in the left paracolic gutter. Now see students, so this is the figure and it shows what it shows. First is the midline or paramedian incision has taken, then a pocket is created between the peritoneum and the posterior rectus sheath. The sigmoid colon is then exteriorized through an opening in the left lower paracolic gutter and was placed in the preperitoneal space, which is already created. The margins of the opening in the peritoneum in left paracolic gutter, they were approximated to the root of the sigmoid colon with absorbable sutures to prevent herniation of the small bowel. So students, there is no need to go into the technical details of the procedure for you, but you should remember extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. And what are the advantages of this procedure? It is easy to perform, minimal complications, and the recurrence is nearly nil. But the disadvantage only, there is a bulge in the lower abdomen after surgery. Then another procedures are the percutaneous endoscopic colostomies. So these are done in high risk patients who are unfit for the surgery. So what is done in these procedures? We should do the colonoscopy, and under transillumination we should do the fixation of the colon by using PEG catheter. PEG means percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy catheter, and a 22 French tube was then pulled and drilled into the colon and through the abdominal wall. So the tube, it will act as a colostomy. So it is a percutaneous endoscopic colostomy. Again, there is no need to go into the technical details of the procedure for your level. Now other procedures, these are the resectionals. Now see, the earlier procedures were sigmoidopexy, that means fixation of the sigmoid colon. Mesosigmoidoplasty means the longitudinal cut and horizontal suturing of the sigmoid colon, and other is the extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. So students, so in these procedures we have not excised the sigmoid colon, so only we have done the fixation. Now there are other procedures which are called as the resectional procedures, and the resectional procedures, these are the Hartmann's operation, exteriorization of the bowel, or we call it as a double barrel colostomy, and the sigmoidectomy with primary end-to-end anastomosis. Resectional procedures, when these procedures are done whenever there is a gangrene of the sigmoid colon. So after opening the abdomen, when there is a gangrene of the sigmoid colon, then we have three options like this. Hartmann's procedure, double barrel colostomy, or primary end-to-end anastomosis. So now students see what is the Hartmann's procedure. So in Hartmann's operation, what is done? We have resected the sigmoid colon because it was a gangrenous. Then closure of the rectal stump and the end colostomy is done. That means the descending colon brought out over the abdominal wall as a fecal fistula. So Hartmann's operation includes resection of the sigmoid colon. So this is the sigmoid colon which is resected. Then after resection of the sigmoid colon, this is the remaining rectal stump, and this rectal stump is closed, and the proximal colon, or we call it as a descending colon, and this descending colon brought out over the anterior abdominal wall as a end colostomy or temporary end colostomy. So this is the Hartmann's procedure, and it is a two-stage operations. So we have done the colostomy, but it is a temporary. So after 4 to 6 weeks, when the condition of the patient improves, patient becomes stable, then this colostomy is closed by doing the colorectal anastomosis. That means the descending colon, it is anastomosed with the rectum. So this is the Hartmann's procedure. Then the alternative to the Hartmann's procedure, do the sigmoid resection of the sigmoid colon. Primary anastomosis is done, but the proximal diverting loop ileostomy is done. So it will protect the anastomosis, and that ileostomy is also temporary. So it is an alternative to the Hartmann's procedure. Then students, double barrel colostomy. So what is done here? If there is a gangrene of the sigmoid colon, we have resected the colon, then we will brought the proximal colon, that is the descending colon, over the abdominal wall as a colostomy. So proximal stoma will be brought out through the abdominal wall as a colostomy, and the distal stoma, it is brought out as a mucus fistula so as to expel the mucus. So again, this is a two-stage procedure. So after that, the colostomy closure will be performed when the patient becomes stable. So this is the exteriorization of the bowel, or we call it as a double barrel colostomy. Then what is the definitive treatment of the sigmoid colon? So definitive treatment of the sigmoid colon is the sigmoidectomy with colorectal anastomosis. Now see students, this is the sigmoid colon, and this is sigmoid colon is resected. So after resection, this descending colon, it is sutured to the rectum. So this is a colorectal anastomosis. Sigmoidectomy with colorectal anastomosis, it is the definitive treatment of the sigmoid volvulus. So student, remember this: sigmoidectomy, excision of the sigmoid colon, and colorectal anastomosis. This is the definitive treatment. So now this is a flow chart of the management of the sigmoid volvulus. So students, again I will tell you, the clinical examination is very important, and once we diagnose it is a case of sigmoid volvulus, so we will resuscitate the patient, fluid and electrolyte, correction of the fluid and electrolyte imbalance. Then on examination, there is no evidence of bowel gangrene. So what we will do? We will do the endoscopic detorsion plus placement of the rectal tube. So we will try this. If the endoscopic detorsion is successful, then we will post the patient for elective surgery. If it is unsuccessful, then we will immediately post the patient for surgery even if there is no gangrene, because endoscopy has failed to do the detorsion, and if we keep the patient as it is, it will lead to gangrene and the perforation peritonitis. So even if there is a viable bowel, still we are subjecting the patient for emergency exploratory laparotomy. So students, there are two possibilities. First, we will do the colonoscopy. Colonoscopy either is successful or colonoscopy fails. Colonoscopy is successful, so we will prepare the patient for elective surgery. And the elective surgery, now I have told you, the definitive surgery is sigmoidectomy and the colorectal anastomosis. And it is done in the same admission in a fit patient. If it is unsuccessful, so what will you do? Bowel is viable, so depending upon the condition of the patient, resection and primary anastomosis with or without on table lavage with proximal loop ileostomy is done. Or if the patient's condition is not good, patient is having cardiopulmonary problems, patient is not stable, then we will do the other non-resectional procedures. These are the sigmoidopexy, mesosigmoidoplasty, or extraperitonealization of the sigmoid colon. If the bowel is non-viable, then resection of the sigmoid colon followed by Hartmann's procedure. And the second surgery for restoration of the bowel is done after some days. Now students, on clinical examination, if there is no evidence of bowel gangrene, immediately patient is posted for emergency exploratory laparotomy and followed by Hartmann's procedure. So students, after going through this management flow chart, you have to come to you notice that the clinical examination of the patient is very important, and on clinical examination only we can decide whether patient is having a gangrene or patient is don't have the gangrene of the sigmoid colon. And depending upon this, the treatment changes with gangrene, without gangrene. With gangrene, directly exploratory laparotomy. Without gangrene, first do the colonoscopy and try to do the detorsion. If the detorsion fails, again patient is subjected for emergency exploratory laparotomy. If there is a success of the colostomy, the success of the colonoscopy and the detorsion is successful, then we will electively post the patient for surgery and we will do the definitive treatment. So everything it runs about the condition of the bowel and the condition of the patient. Bowel gangrenous, bowel viable. Patient condition is not good, patient condition is not good, or patient is fit for surgery. So this is the flow chart. Now the complications of the sigmoid volvulus. So what will happen if we don't treat the volvulus? All you know, this is a closed loop obstruction. So it will lead to the gangrene of the bowel, and after gangrene there is a perforation and fecal peritonitis. And because of there is a translocation of the bacteria and the toxins, it leads to secondary renal failure and the multi-organ failure. But in rare cases, abdominal compartment syndrome is also seen in patients with sigmoid volvulus. Now students, this is important, reperfusion syndrome. So reperfusion syndrome is what? So if there is a gangrene of the sigmoid colon, so on opening the abdomen, before doing the detorsion of the colon, we have to ligate the pedicles, vascular pedicles. Otherwise, what will happen if we do the detorsion? Then the endotoxins they enter into the circulation and it will lead to multi-organ failure in these patients, and so this is called as the reperfusion of the syndrome. So as far as possible, try to control the vascular pedicles in a gangrene of the sigmoid colon before detorsion so as to avoid the reperfusion syndrome. Now, what are the factors which affect the surgical outcome in these patients? So age of the patient. So age of the patient is very important. If the age of the patient is more than 60 years, so in old age Usually the patient is having cardiopulmonary problems and the outcome is not good. Presence of the comorbid conditions. Patient is having chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, patient is having heart disease, diabetic patients, and the patient is having hypertension. So in these patients the outcome is not good. Elective surgery versus emergency surgery. So what happens in elective surgery? In elective surgery we have a time for a preparation of the patient, but in emergency surgery we don't have any time for preparation of the patient or stabilization of the patients, and that's why the prognosis is not good in emergency surgeries as compared to elective surgeries. Then the viability of the bowel, gangrene of the bowel, or bowel is viable or bowel is not viable. So the patients having gangrenous bowel, again the outcome is not good. The shock at the time of presentation, if the patient is in shock at the time of presentation, then the prognosis is not good. Then the time interval between the diagnosis and the treatment, if the time interval between the diagnosis and treatment is more, prognosis is not good. The overall mortality in these patients in recent studies is less than 5%. So this is all about the sigmoid volvulus, students. And so in examination you get the short notes. So in that you have to write the definition of the volvulus, then clinical presentation of the patient, various radiological investigations for confirmation of our diagnosis. What I have told is the plain X-ray of abdomen, what are the signs on plain abdominal X-ray, signs on barium enema, and the signs on CT scan, and the treatment of the patient depending upon the whether the bowel is gangrenous or non-gangrenous. So this is all about the gangrene, this is all about the volvulus of the sigmoid colon. So these are the reference books. So this is all about the sigmoid volvulus. Thank you, students.